Hello, everyone. This is Guillermo Hamlin here in my living room in Arlington, but don't fret. I'm here representing Malden's government access channel for the city of Malden, its residents, for those on Comcast, Verizon, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Ustream, however you're seeing us, we are so grateful to have you here during these times. I have a very special guest. I have Superintendent John Oteri from the Malden Public Schools to give us an update on everything. John, how are you? Thank you for coming on and talking to us. And in the meantime, just how you been?
Doing well. We're working really hard here. I don't think any of us in the administrative staff have ever worked as harder or more intensely as we have these past 5 weeks. We've been dealing with the fluidity of the situation, which has gone from what we thought was going to be short term to longer term, and now we still don't know how much longer we'll be out. We're slated to return May 4th, but I think when we listen to our elected officials and leaders, that certainly seems like it'll be longer. But we're really doing our best to keep on top of the situation and provide as much support and connectivity to all of our students and families as we can.
So, can you start out by summarizing the list of challenges facing public schools during this time of unprecedented circumstances? Sorry to go
Sure.
so strong on that one.
No, I think if we started, that would be a rather lengthy list. I think I'd start first of all with where I sort of alluded to at the beginning. I think the biggest thing with this is the uncertainty. We don't know the extent of it, how long it'll last. I mean, this isn't, like any other school closure that anyone else has experienced, where it be a natural disaster or weather or a tornado. I mean, we can't see the progress. For instance, if it was a snowstorm, is how close we are to removing the snow. Instead, this is a very serious crisis that we're in. That is where we have now had over 1,000 deaths in Massachusetts as a result of the coronavirus. So it's very serious. It's very sombering. It's dangerous. As a superintendent, as a school leader, you always have the safety of our students in mind as the first priority. If they're not safe, they can't learn. So we're trying to provide that, but we're not there. I've always said that students have to be safe physically in the school. We got to make sure that the ceiling isn't falling in on them. They're getting rain coming in, but they also have to be emotionally safe. From all the prejudices and isms that exist in our world. And that's, we're now doing that kind of remotely, and that's a little challenging. I think that the biggest challenge is we've had, a history of education in this country for a couple hundred years that has been predicated on face-to-face, contact in a brick and mortar building. And that now has changed. We've pivoted that in less than a couple weeks to now we've made our pre-K to 12 really a remote learning site. So making sure that our students and families and staff are on board with that is a lot different than what we had experienced prior to going out for this closure. So I would start with those two as the
Um,
biggest ones, and we can fill in everything else that goes in
so,
under.
so honing in on that, how have the objectives of educational activities changed from the time the school closings first happened in March to the point at which they are at now?
Sure. So when we went out, we in Malden canceled from March 13th onward, and my decision in consult with our Board of Health and Mayor and Emergency Management team was we would be out indefinitely because we couldn't come up with an objective or an arbitrary date that would have said it was safe to return. We would return when it would be safe. That Sunday, the governor announced on television that schools would be closed until April 6th. And at that point, Commissioner Riley had several conference calls, Zoom calls with the Superintendent's Association, where he called for us to come up with a list, produce a curriculum of engagement and enrichment activities. which we did. And we had that up and running on Wednesday, the 18th of March, I think. Thanks to a lot of hard work by our administration, they were able to do that. It was broken down by grade level. And that seemed to be the model. And then about a week and a half after that, the governor extended the closure to May 4th. And the charge from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education was to create a remote learning plan, which the commissioner went to great lengths to distinguish between online learning. This would be a deeper dive into the curriculum. This would be utilizing a combination of online and offline resources, utilizing the natural world that our students live in, so that there would be a great deal of flexibility in this. I think that we needed to look at this as that we were all impacted by this virus, not just our students, but our staff, and they also have their children at home. So we created the remote learning plan. It was not done in a vacuum. We did that in concert with our Malden Education Association, but we talked with a number of districts and we shared some best practices, and we developed this that would be flexible, that would support our students socially and emotionally. It would allow some flexibility within our staff and our students to do the work that we would like to see them have done over the next several weeks, as long as we've been out. So we've made three pivots. We went from no school to enrichment and engagement to now remote learning.
All right, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for updating us on that. We genuinely appreciate that, METV, soon to be UMA. At this point, what is a typical school day like for a student in the public schools? You kind of touched on that, I don't want to tread on that, but if you could really just break it down for those of us who need to explain to us simply, because we're trying to reassure family members as well as trying to maybe forge ahead with raising and supporting our children in the homes.
So it's, I guess, an analogy would be just like this television show. We're no longer in the studio, we're doing it remotely. That's what's happening with our students. They're not in a classroom anymore. They're in a virtual classroom. Sometimes they're in a one-on-one with their teacher in a Google Classroom setting or a Google Meet Hangout. We've chosen that platform for a number of reasons. One is that the district uses it, but it is also compliant with the guidelines around privacy. And Google is not a third party that uses the data that they collect. So we know that that's a solid platform to use. It's one that's highly recommended. So the typical day of a student is a lot different than what they were accustomed to. The guidelines that we have in the remote learning plan that the state really gave us as a framework was to expect about a half a day's worth of work. So that's about what it would be. It should be less than a full day. It should be a lot different than what they've had. It's really a deeper dive into already learned material. So it's not introducing new material for a variety of reasons, but that's their day is much different. And we're working through that. Our teachers' days are much different as well. These are challenging times, and we've risen to the occasion with a plan that hopefully is flexible enough and supportive enough for everybody.
So beyond Google Classrooms and that technology, which is crucial and reliable, what methodologies alongside the use of that technology is being used to teach students in the public schools?
Well, I think that kind of varies along the grade levels too. I think when we look at the high school, they're in a little different position because they have been a one-to-one initiative for several years. So all of our students at the high school have had a Chromebook, and there has been an employment of a lot of the technology and online resources there. So an online technology at the high school might look much different than it does at the lower grade levels, the kindergarten and first and second grade. There may be some of the platforms that we use in a number of ways. The online resources at the high school are a lot different, but we use a number of online providers and vendors, whether it be iReady or IXL, Gizmos. We've got a number of platforms that support learning in a variety of ways where students can do their work with that is in line with the frameworks and supports the work that our classroom teachers do. There could be opportunities for students to do work where they express themselves. We've had a number of videos that some students have done. We have students who have expressed their work using art. I mean, it can be as simplistic as using their cell phone where they take a picture and upload that or send it to where they're using any number of the educational platforms and subscriptions that we have to dive deeper into the curriculum, whether it's I'm just thinking of some of the emails that I forwarded. The Kennedy Library has a great deal of resources that some of our students access from grades 6 to 12. You know, the teaching tolerance curriculum is another social studies resource, and you know, things that for smarter people and like me, math and science has their own virtual resources that help augment from grades kindergarten on up. So there's a tremendous amount of different types of technology. You know, we use a Chromebook as the device that we use. So that's kind of the standard, but we do have students that have used other types of platforms as well.
Well, I was going to say that's all really good. I'm very appreciative knowing that that's all been the response. And I want to thank you for coming on and
Sure.
reporting that. So that's inspiring, but what factored into that? What input went into that approach to make technology go further to the curriculum? Weighing the state and federal guidelines in making those decisions. How did you? How did that? Did any of that? I'm trying to think. Like when you're in the midst of all this, you had to be quite responsive and quick. How were you so creative during such a trying time?
Well, our curriculum people, our directors and principals that deal with the curriculums directly, have employed a number of these resources to begin with, so they were proven commodities to us. Um, Also, I think a number of the vendors have reached out, um, not necessarily looking to capitalize. I think a lot of them did it out of the general kindness of supporting students. And I'll mention one specifically that's worked with the state, and that's public education, WGBH. They put all of their resources that they have for education online available to all students in the Commonwealth. They also dedicated in the first week or two of the crisis programming time for education. You know, they interrupted the regular programming to do some of that for families that didn't necessarily have internet access. So that was a decision. I think that the commissioner and the department really wanted us to tap into some of the program vendors that we have. Of course, a number of the publishers. It's not like it was when I went to school where the only tool you had was a textbook. These textbook companies now provide a number of tutorials online. They provide the text online, and there's deeper dives into each one of their units. So I think that we look at all of those opportunities as a way in which we can, how do we bring them together that we can produce a curriculum that will be sustainable over the next couple weeks or for a bit longer that supports the work that we do. So, you know, we also took the direction of the state, who takes it from the federal government on a number of initiatives. You know, we want to make sure that we're in compliance with all of our regulations. So, you know, that was all factored in to the construction of the remote learning plan.
So, on top of all that, how are Malden public schools addressing concerns of equity and the way that this is being implemented to Malden's families?
So the equity and access piece has been primary in my vision as to how this plays out. And part of it's, I think, intrinsic to me, growing up growing up in Malden, growing up not having access to a number of resources myself, we wanted to make sure that what we put out was as equitable and accessible for our students as possible. So um, we first thing we after we got the engagement piece up, we did a survey and asked families that lacked a device, didn't have a laptop or a Chromebook at home, and we were able to come up with a Chromebook distribution program. Now that's nothing that happens quickly. We frankly put a lot of people at risk in order to do that. We had a number, couple of dozen folks that were really courageous and helped get the Chromebooks ready. They had to be inventory cataloged, scanned, sanitized in some cases, and then distributed. And over a 3-day period, we distributed over 750 Chromebooks. When you add that with the 1,850 Chromebooks that are at the high school, right now we have 2,600 Chromebooks in families' hands. Part of that survey was if you had a student at the high school, you could not request another Chromebook because we wanted to make sure we had Chromebooks for those who didn't. So I think when we do the math, we know that we've touched at least half of our families out there with a Chromebook. And of course, there are families that do have devices at home. The next obstacle is something that's a little beyond our control as well, which is the internet access. Because we're a one-to-one at the high school, we have over 100 hotspots that we have bought over the years and have distributed to students that do not have internet access at home. But we know that there's even more right now that don't have internet access. But we don't have the budget right now, but we're trying to address if there's a way we can fulfill this. We will be putting in, as we had stated with the remote learning plan, a check-in, which that survey will be up online today. And over the next couple of weeks, we can have families say if they have internet access or not, how this is working. So we're looking at that. I think also that the state level, the commissioner has noted that the state is in talks with the major internet providers, Comcast, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, about providing more hotspots, free hotspots across this Commonwealth, or ways in which they can distribute individual hotspots that can be given out. We can do it at the local level here, but it's expensive. We don't have the budget for it. Hopefully there'll be something at the state level. There are free hotspots in Malden that I believe Comcast or Xfinity, I'm not sure which one they go by when it comes to this, have. So people can access it that way. And I know we've had a number of people that show up outside of the public library to kind of get on it, to at least then call Xfinity to help troubleshoot how they can navigate that, because we're not Xfinity, but we get those calls. We tell them they really need to call Xfinity because we don't have the technology to do that.
So something to touch on is, so you mentioned accessible previously. Does that mean, for instance, what about student disabilities? Is there any way in implementing that and making sure that they're covered in all this?
Sure, we're really taking the direction from both the state and the federal governments on our students with disabilities and how they access remote learning, which, as you can imagine, some of it just really can't be done. We can't provide physical therapy virtually. We can't provide necessarily a one-on-one, which some students have. Some of the delivery of services is really a challenge, and we don't have the capacity to do remotely, but we are working with the state and federal authorities on how we can best meet that to the best we can. And I think this has always been the concern that I think many of us have had during this time, is that it's not really accessible for all students. We do the best that we can with the resources that we have. We also, I think, in terms of accessibility and equity across the Commonwealth, I think we know certainly that in urban areas, there's fewer students who have that um, ability to have the technology and connect to the internet. We also know that that happens in rural areas. I've talked with colleagues who are superintendents in very rural areas in Massachusetts, and they're having the same problem. Either cable doesn't come to them, or internet is prohibitively expensive, or they can't access it. So it's been a challenge. But this is something that we think needs to be approached at the state or possibly federal level. In order to, I think we need to look at internet access as as we probably do other necessities such as electricity. And I think that in this time, particular in a crisis time, um, having internet access is almost a necessity. We're doing what we can with what we have. Always looking to increase that. So we'll be continuing to address that as we get ways to augment and mitigate this.
So, assuming federal, state, as well as the access to the internet is done, assuming that it's accessible and there is a way forward, how has the communication with the parents um, happening, and what role do parent school communications play in with implementing these communications in terms of implementing the overall educational plan?
So with any organization, communication is critical. We've got to communicate clearly and unequivocally so people can understand and follow what's going on. So our communication from the central office level, we continue to use our Connect Ed calls and Connect Ed emails, which reaches the broadest base of our population. When I send out a Connect Ed call, many people are disappointed in the last year. They don't hear my voice, which is fine. They hear a computer voice, and the reason for that is because using the text to talk feature in our platform, I get the message out in 5 languages. I get it out in English, Spanish, Portuguese, I think French, Mandarin, and Chinese in voice. That's the capability they have. With the email feature, I add 11 more languages onto that. So we're able to, and Malden is a polylingual community. We don't have one dominant language. We really have about 7 or 8 that are probably the most prevalent, but we have over 50 languages in our school district. So we use that. I use Twitter to make announcements and point people to important letters, documents, and communications. We continue to use and update our website regularly. So that's important. I've had the opportunity a few times over the last couple of weeks during this crisis to be on cable TV like I am now to get some messages out as well. We work with the Mayor's Office of Communication to get a number of messages out. At the building level, our principals use a variety. Also, we have a monthly newsletter that we publish as well. At the building level, our principals use both the Connect Ed platform, their newsletters, emails too, very effective. Also phone calls. Once you get into the building level and the teacher level, that's been one of the ways in which we've communicated as well. We've made it a point to make sure that we try to make contact with every single one of our students for a number of reasons. We've also this week have employed our school nurses to contact some of our students who have been high risk and some of our students who are on medication, just to do a double check in on them. Our counselors have checked in from the very beginning with their caseloads to make sure that those students are safe and everybody's healthy. Our Board of Public Health, when we are told of a family that has somebody that's tested positive, have been very supportive and have worked with those families to give them the resources that they need as well.
So I want to focus in on that. So for teachers, this is obviously very difficult. They have to learn and implement all of this whole new way of teaching, while many of them may be home with their own children, while frankly also dealing with the stress of this pandemic. Um, Appropriately, what is the school doing to support teachers during this time?
So that's a great question. So also when we look at that communication, a number of our teachers, we're a Google district. We use Google Classroom and Google Meets uh, to help that communication. So we've had some training sessions with some teachers training other teachers because some have more familiarity with it than others. Like I said, our high school staff have been using a number of these tools for a long time. They're a little more familiar with it. Some of our teachers who have graduated in the last couple of years from college, I think, have had the benefit of having this as part of their teacher preparation. So we've used that. A number of we've had some tutorials that we've put out. We're looking to develop sort of a best practices forum over the next couple of weeks that we can get some of our teachers a little more help on this technology. Also, just we set this remote learning plan up, especially in the lower grade levels, by team. So they have the benefit of working collaboratively and cooperatively. So there's been a lot of tutoring and teaching. We've also had teachers that, much like kids, when they do something successfully, they show it to you. And we've had reports of teachers sending videos to their principals and to their supervisors of like, hey, look at, I didn't know how to do this 2 days ago, and now look at it. Look what I've been able to do with my students in the classroom. Thank you to my colleague who showed me this, or I learned this. I took a webinar that was free the other night. I've gone onto the Google website and taken some tutorials there. So we're lifelong learners as educators, so we're constantly looking to learn more to meet the needs of our students. So a number of our teachers are really self-starters on this, and they've done this. I think that there's been no shortage of support. When somebody has a question, if they don't know how to answer it, they've given it to somebody who can, and given them the tools that they need to be successful.
Zooming out on this, as you brought up, education, we're all being lifelong learners. Does this time allow us to offer ourselves some reflection on the way that education is delivered?
There's a few observations I've had over the last 4 or 5 weeks during this crisis, and one is that I think it's given us all, whether you're in education or not, a time to pause and reflect on what's important. Um, I think we've all seen this is not anything that we can take lightly. I think that we've seen the fragility and the how precious life is. Um, I think we see what's important. We see the good of people that have stepped up and helped people. So I think that's one of the positives, just in general, is a societal benefit that we look at. Um, with that, I think that this can serve as a blueprint going forward for education to address some of the things. I think some of the benefits that we get out of this is that we see that there's not total equity everywhere. Maybe this will be the impetus that government can step in and provide internet for everybody, that it's not an individual commodity, that it's really a public utility as such. And maybe that's one of the things that I'm hoping is an offshoot of this. I think we also can look at this as the positive I'm seeing with this is when we go back with our staff, uh, and we do it regularly is now while we're out, is just to reinforce how well equipped and how good we are at changing and delivering. I think sometimes, like students, we get overwhelmed and say, I can't do that. That's hard. We've done it. We've done it the way we preach. We teach our kids to, dig deeper, look inside themselves. We teach our kids to work collaboratively. We teach in the classrooms peer modeling and peer editing, and a lot of those things have transformed over to the teaching side. We tell our kids to, when they don't know something, look it up, find out some more, do a little research. And we've done that as educators. So in some ways, I think we need to look and say we've practiced what we've preached. We have stressed a number of these things. We've said that technology is a tool, but it's not the be all and end all. I think at the end of it, We may be physically distant, but we are not socially distant. We're socially connected. And we've just had to use some technology to do that. It's not quite the same. I think we all, with the myriad of videos that I've seen from different schools reaching out to their kids, they miss the kids. They want them back. They miss their colleagues. They miss, high fiving that kid, or when he's, done something great, or patting them on the back, excuse me, looking them in the eye. Some of that gets lost in this technology. So
Well,
I think
and
you can also see that there's been ways in which we can augment our delivery of education. That the technology, I think it's made some of our kids more comfortable with it. So maybe it will be a blueprint going forward. I think it also, and hopefully we don't have to do this for another several generations, if at all, but it does provide us, if we ever had to go out for an extended time, we've got at least a chapter in our playbook that gives us some examples of how things went. And we'll continue to evaluate this as we go, and after we finish this, about what we could do differently, what we could do better, what worked and what didn't work, and how we can best meet the needs of our students in this community. So I think it provides a number of reflection points for us, both professionally, but also personally. And I think as a society, I think collectively, uh, we need to look at a lot of this. So I think there's a number of positives that we can see coming out of this. I think that we're staying together. We're all following the directives of staying at home and not spreading this, because we've seen how tragic that can be. So I think the unity, unlike this, a big snowstorm where it brings a neighborhood together and everybody shovels out their driveways and the fire hydrants collectively, we don't have that because we can't be there shoulder to shoulder because of the distancing. But we're there in a number of ways. So I think that those are all the positives that I would draw out of this right now. And I think the further we get into this, the more those and deeper those will become, and probably more clear to everybody.
well, thank you so much, Superintendent John Oteri, for coming on and talking to us, MATV, soon to be UMA Government Access.
You're most welcome. I appreciate it. And, if there's anything else the schools can be of use to MATV or UMA, please let us know. We're here to, really broadcast our messages loudly and as comprehensively as we possibly can.
Yeah, come on anytime. We're your megaphone. Wishing you, yours, and the entire Malden Public School District well.
Thank you very much, and stay healthy.